We're here with John Battelle, the founder or co-founder of several iconic brands and firms, The Industry Standard, Wired, Federated Media, and most recently NewCo. Is that the term?
That's
yeah,
right.
NewCo. And you've been doing a lot of work, and also the author of The Search for Search, or what?
Just The Search.
The Search,
Yeah.
right, still in print. And I know, John, you've been thinking a lot about the role of a corporation, or the evolving role, sort of almost a little bit, the stuff I've read of yours going back to we need more Henry Ford and less Jack Welch, is how I would sort of summarize it.
The good part of Henry Ford.
There you go. Yeah, people talk about his stuff in Brazil, which I didn't know about, but I guess I got pretty dodgy there.
Yeah.
So give us the cliff notes on what you think the new role, or the role of the evolving corporation is in our society.
I think what's happened in probably the last 30 years, and really it's accelerating now, and we're seeing it playing in literal real time with the CEO of Facebook being hammered by Congress
as we speak.
Is that we, as a society, are expecting more out of our corporations. Because I think we're waking up to the power that they have, particularly when we shift into sort of a digital age and we realize that the most nimble and capable organization in society of managing our data and doing things with our data and changing the course of our lives because of that access to that data is the corporation.
Yeah, and exploring space, and they're doing all the big R&D now.
The corporations have basically colonized what used to be known as the public good, right? The public square is now Facebook or Twitter. We used to hail cabs. Now we use a private corporation to get around. Down to that in Silicon Valley, there's almost nothing that used to be public that hasn't been turned into some kind of a startup
apps
idea.
for parking tickets.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so as more and more of our, what used to be public commons, whether those commons were well managed or not by our government, is kind of not material, but more and more of the commons are being managed by corporations. And I think that is forcing a new conversation about what the role of companies are, what should we expect from companies, the externalities of corporate, mission being, most corporations are created to extract profit and put it into the pockets of shareholders. That's what corporations are supposed to do. Is that enough? Should companies perhaps have more, a more more rounded view of their mission than just profit seeking? And I think particularly younger people who work at these companies are starting to demand that their values of the corporation align with the values that they share as citizens, as human beings. And we're seeing that pressure in the way corporations are starting to talk about, what their responsibility is to society, whether or not they should be spending, all of their R&D just on profit seeking, or perhaps they should also be giving back to communities. And we see very large corporations, Unilever comes to mind, even PepsiCo, Walmart, starting to actually take a leadership position and say, well, I know that we're not being told by the government to increase wages or drive sustainability through our supply chain, but we're going to do it anyways because we want to get ahead of the problems that we see long-term in our business if we don't. Because of the externalities of our business practices for the past 3 or 4 decades have created, islands of plastic, floating plastic in the oceans, and big, problems of climate change and problems of income inequality. And we realize that if we don't start trying to lead on these issues, then our businesses are actually going to suffer significantly. So there's this interesting business imperative to do more good and be more purpose-driven. But I think there's also an imperative from society saying, hey, wait a minute, if these companies are the most important things, in society and the most nimble, the most adaptive structure we have, we should start demanding more of them. And I think there's really no better case of that right now than Facebook.
So to take the cynical view, it feels like the expectation that corporations should be better citizens or good citizens is not a new idea.
Right.
It's just that all of a sudden corporations have this outsized role in our economy and our society and can be weaponized, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, isn't what we have here market failure, that corporations are supposed to pursue profit and being kind of pretty much monocular on that goal works fairly well, create profits, economic security for shareholders. And then what we have is market failure, and that we're not regulating them, that we've decided to let them just run amok, and that we just need to restore better regulation, break them up, trust busting, whatever it might be. But you see that we need to evolve to more of a corporations take on additional roles. So I guess who are some role models, and how do we measure success when those, and again, this is really cynical, but those same millennials that are supposedly want to go to work for purpose-driven organizations, I see them mostly going to work for organizations where they can make a ton of money off their stock options.
Right.
And that if that foots to corporate mission or purpose-driven mission, and they give a pair of eyeglasses to people in need, fine, but I want options, I want them to go public.
Yeah, I mean, that motivation is probably paramount over any other for most people who, work at these kinds of companies. I think there are, almost too many companies to be able to name that actually are driven by more than that. And at NewCo, that's actually one of our jobs, is to identify those companies and kind of celebrate them and say, wow, you guys are actually.
Do you think Google does this? I mean, wasn't Google the original gangster?
Google was.
Every fifth day, work on your own stuff?
Google was like that.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, Google had as its informal motto. Now, informal mottos always come back to bite you in the Facebook's was, move fast and break things.
Right.
And then they broke our election.
Right.
Yeah. Google's informal model was "don't be evil." I mean, it was literally "don't be evil," and I think for many years they actually used that as a template for making decisions. Is this going to be bad or good?
And you know that company as well as anybody that didn't work there. Would you describe the founding ethos and the gestalt there as being tangibly different than Facebook?
I would.
Yep.
Tangibly different.
Yep.
Having known both the companies when they were sub 300 people.
And does it all come, is it the fish rots from the head? Is it the CEO and the people around that person and then all the way down?
We have an odd reality in the Valley, which is the Valley is really founder driven, right? And so if you look at Apple, people still compare Tim Cook, who's been there driving that for 5 years, still to Steve Jobs, right? And Zuckerberg's still running, Facebook, and Larry Page is still running Alphabet, which owns Google. Jeff Bezos is still running Amazon. So if you look at your four, for the most part, they're totally founder-driven cultures. And you can trace their DNA, yes, directly to the founder, without question. And if you look at the culture that created Facebook, that culture came out of essentially a Harvard dorm room. Look at these dumb people who are giving me their information. I'm going to take advantage of them, which is
dumb.
Yeah, that's verbatim quote, right? Yeah. That's a culture, okay? And
what do you think the culture was at Google?
Now, Google, the culture was academic, and this is why I have I would say, an increased respect for the founding culture of Google over, say, Snapchat or Facebook. The culture was, we want to explore a really hard academic problem, right? We're looking for a problem that is at super scale, that's difficult math, that hasn't been solved before. Hey, here's this thing called the internet that has massive endpoints. Can we map them all? Can we connect them instantaneously with relevance? Can we solve a really hard relevance problem? That's the founding culture. And these were two people who were, immigrants, from immigrant families, and so there's a really different kind of vibe about that than like even the vibe of Microsoft. Bill Gates came from an upper middle class family. His father was very successful, and he basically took advantage of some people who weren't paying attention, made MS-DOS, and just took over the world at the time. So I think Google was kind of an outlier. Now, has it changed? Yes. Is it like it was then? No. Has it had to adapt because it's losing to Facebook? Absolutely. And has it not been as open and as academically driven as it once was? Absolutely.
But how do you solve for that, other than because these things are baked into kind of who you are, and when you create a two-class shareholder system, which Google and Facebook have done, meaning we're stuck with these guys. We're stuck with their ethos and who they are and what toys they did or did not play with.
This is why this is a very important question, and I think this is why the hearings right now are so important and interesting, is that you have to see change from the founder. You literally have to.
But what if you don't? What if Mark Zuckerberg's just been overcoached by very expensive? There are 600 people in communications and PR at Facebook of 24,000. Right. What if he's just totally full of shit, is never going to change, is totally broken, didn't grow up in a society where the Pentagon Papers were important, that the Fourth Estate plays a special role in society? Yeah. What if he just never figures that out? Well, how do you solve for that?
The only way you solve for that is you leave this platform.
Right.
I mean, individually, that's the only way you solve for it.
Do you see that though? I don't see any. I don't
Well,
see people. I don't see consumer. I think consumers talk a big
I'm
game, but they don't
actually
lead.
starting to think that there's an opportunity.
But consumer-led revolution against Facebook.
I think we have obviously a collaboration problem, right? How do you get a lot of people to go move from one place to another so you get that network effect so people start to use a new service? That's why VCs will never invest in a Facebook
Is there another
competitor.
service? Is there a place they could go?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, it feels monopoly power right
yeah,
now.
right. It does, and that question was actually asked of Zuckerberg, and
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, we've got
We've
tons
competition
of
everywhere.
Yeah,
I saw that
competition's
too.
everywhere." Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, you don't. I mean, you can't
yeah.
actually leave Facebook for another service that's just like Facebook. The reason is because all your friends aren't there.
280 million adults in America. 216 million are on Facebook.
Yeah, and but I do believe that there may be an opportunity, particularly just like with Twitter, which started with a particular group of people, probably like you and me, right, who are deep in this space. I think that there may be any number of new services where you see groups of people break off, and if they're particularly well networked, they may then have follow-on effects. I would say that no VC would ever invest in a Facebook competitor last year. Might they this year? They might, because they might say, hey, you know what? We're in the business of taking risks, but there are a lot of unhappy people right now. Facebook is in everyone's mind, and if there is a good solution, we might invest in it. So there are a lot of smart people who can come up with good solutions. I'm actually looking for them. So anyone's watching this, wants to send them to me, I'm really interested.
So going back to the original notion of the evolved corporation or the self-actualized corporation, starts at the founder. Are there certain checks or tests, or what should a board or an investor be looking for other than
Governance is critical, right? And I think
so no two-class shareholder
Yeah.
companies?
Yeah, I think I think that was a ruse, to be honest. I was stunned when I read Google's 2004 S1, which essentially created that two-class structure.
Well, the VCs didn't want to do it, and supposedly
no
they
one
just
wanted.
caved.
They just.
But to be fair, the New York Times has two-class.
Well, the New York Times was what they used in the S1 to justify the two-class structure. We don't ever want Wall Street telling us,
what to do.
we are a public trust. We're a public good.
Right.
That's what the New York Times says. We're a public good, and we don't want Wall Street telling us what to cover, right?
Yeah.
What was fascinating about that is it essentially violates the CDMA, which is the Section 230, which says, we're just a neutral platform. We're not responsible for the content. Now, back to the point about what do you do if a founder doesn't change? Well, what I heard today, and I've only listened to about an hour of the testimony, is Zuckerberg say, we're responsible for the content. That's the first time I've heard that actually stated by anyone at Facebook, that we are responsible. That's a sea change. And I think that that's something that all the lawmakers probably took a note on when he said that. So that's an interesting shift. Now, if you're worth $60 billion, you don't live in the real world. You aren't someone who lives in a world where you're impacted on a day-to-day basis by kind of normal things, right? You don't understand the way most people live. So will he really change? It's a fair question. Will the company really change? I think that the environment is significantly different than it was 6 months ago, and I think it has to. And if it doesn't, I very much believe that the market will offer alternatives. Now, I'm not against regulation. It was clear from the last week that Facebook, Twitter, and possibly Google are just going to push the Honest Ads Act through. It's going to happen. The question is, of course, what's attached to that? Does it include all issues-based advertising and pages that may not be advertising but is just content? If it does, then I think it's a pretty strong piece of legislation and it's a good start. What you've argued for, which is the breakup of these companies into some significant component parts, I think just makes smart business sense. I think there's actually a market case for doing what you're talking about.
I think Amazon and AWS as separate companies would be worth more.
I also think that I think they would be, and I also think there's a national security test for that one in particular.
Yeah.
The stuff that runs over AWS includes like some of the largest banks in the world.
Well, the CIA uses AWS.
And so should that really see as its core mission those customers and not necessarily Whole Foods?
Yeah.
Or whatever other business imperatives that Amazon has to swap between because of all these different divisions. I think it would make a ton of sense to spin that out. They could keep a big percentage of it and make a ton of dough.
It feels as if there's an uncoupling. It used to be 6 months ago or 3 months ago, the anger was at big tech. Now it feels as if Facebook has pulled away as the bad guy.
Yeah.
And Tim Cook, with his performance last week, has somewhat removed himself. He's kind of out of the penalty box. And I would argue that Trump's attack on Amazon has unwittingly immunized them from regulation, because now it's no longer a bipartisan issue. It comes across as a personal attack. He was ham-handed. The data was incorrect. If he had been smarter, I would have thought this was this brilliant Machiavellian move to not regulate Amazon.
Yeah.
Because he's basically made it. It feels to me like he's thrown a blanket of I don't know what the term is. Immunize them.
Yeah.
Do you see it any different? It feels like Facebook, super bad guy, Apple, least bad, Google and Amazon just staying quiet, staying out of the way of the train wreck that is
Google
Facebook
is
right now.
absolutely saying zero.
Yeah, they just want to be quiet.
They just don't. I wouldn't say a thing if I were there.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say a thing. Amazon, I think. Look, the way this usually works is something bad happens, and then everyone talks about it, right? So what? A misstep, a Cambridge Analytica level event. We're one news cycle from that for Google or for Amazon. I really think so. I mean, I think it will all turn. Yes, I agree with you that Amazon basically got immunized by Trump's kind of ham-fisted.
They don't pay state taxes. Well, actually, they do pay state taxes. They don't pay
yeah.
corporate taxes.
Well, and then they fell back to third party, and it's like.
But going back to your notion, and this might be naive, I've always felt that Google was more self-aware about just how dangerous their platform and data are, and that they've taken more. They're not. Facebook is the bank that leaves its door open and its vault door open and then says, "Oh my gosh, we've been robbed." Yeah. Whereas Google has armed guards at the door.
Yeah.
Is that?
That's absolutely true, and the reason is because Google for the first 10 years wasn't actually in the personal information business, right? They did not know who you were, Scott. Mm-hmm. They knew who your cookie was, your browser, and then your mobile ID, but they actually didn't know. They didn't have a profile of you. Mm-hmm. Right? Now that's changed over time as they bought YouTube and as they started creating identity across all of their services. And you're logged in or you're not logged in, they're very smart at creating a profile of you. They did that in response to Facebook. 2012, 13 is when it really started happening. Everyone thinks Google Plus was a complete failure. Google Plus was not a failure. Google Plus was an identity layer that they put across everything that, they called Google Plus and said it was a Facebook competitor. It was just a head fake so that they could get identity into everything that was Google. So they could basically, all the advertisers were like, hey, look, Facebook can tell me everything about everybody. What can you do, Google? Mm-hmm. And so they're like, oh, right, we got to get on that. So they got on that, and so they're now in the identity business as well. So they could have a similar kind of event, but you're right, they do not have that app ecosystem. They do not have a set of policies that are they've just been at it longer. Mm-hmm. They've had their crises. Mm-hmm. Their crises came in 2004 to 2010, basically, and so they know how to run that like grown-ups, basically. Mm-hmm. And like responsible citizens.
Google really well. Is your sense that when you look at YouTube and you look at search, are they at 92% share of search? Shouldn't they? That to me just feels like at a minimum a utility that should be regulated. What is their? I've never understood. What is the?
Well, that's what Europe thinks.
Just regulate like a utility.
I think that we're getting close to that in Europe.
Yeah.
We're not done. They're not done. Yeah. Right? The biggest fine ever, right? Yeah. And that was just one of
GDRP, regulating
there's one of 6 or 7
France
complaints
tax
that they're working on. So, that is an ongoing, dialogue that isn't over. So as goes Europe, generally goes the regulatory frameworks elsewhere, just because it's such a big market that why would you spend so much money creating technology over here and not create it over here? That's what I heard Mark say today. It's like, hey, GDPR is coming, mm-hmm. so we'll just roll it out everywhere, mm-hmm. And because once we've built it, we may as well. Then that inoculates us from whatever might be coming because we're already ahead of it.
Yep.
So I think that, I think regulating it as a utility or like a utility, but probably not under the same kinds of, because with search, I have to say that there is in fact a viable alternative, and there are many viable alternatives.
Is that Bing?
Yeah, well, it's a viable alternative. Bing isn't bad. It actually isn't bad.
Yeah. And Amazon search.
And Amazon is, at least on the advertising side of it, they're up and coming. They're well over billions of dollars.
I use Ask Jeeves.
Do you really? They still around.
So you know these companies really well. So first off, on Facebook, I'll give you a thesis and you push back on it or agree with it. This morning I was in Midtown with a hedge fund manager, and he walked in and he opened the door so that his traders could hear, and he said, "Facebook, buy or sell?" And I said, "Buy." And my feeling is that my informal survey of advertisers, 5 million advertisers, and so far, what was it? Laura, the commentator on Fox mocks the 17-year-old, which is awful. A third of her advertisers leave.
Right.
Facebook gets weaponized through either negligence or recklessness. Our democracy is undermined, and Pep Boys and Playboys say we're out.
Yeah.
Just nobody. I mean,
Right.
literally crickets, right?
Right.
And users continue to express their indignation about what's happened on Facebook and on Instagram. So business accelerates. This is an incredible buying opportunity. We don't remember this in 6 months, and the stock's at 225 or 250.
Well, if you're looking short to midterm, I would agree.
Yeah.
I would absolutely agree with you. I think Facebook's, it was up 2 times the market. Market had a good day today.
Yeah, it was up 4%.
It was up 4%. The market was up 2%.
Yeah.
So, and it was really funny to watch it as I was watching it on television. I was watching it fluctuate as Mark was making points, which was really,
going up and down.
it was really interesting. So, yeah, I think, it took a 10% hit?
Well, since it's almost in correction territory. At one point, it was almost down 20% from the high. But all you have to do is go back to Q4. The hit it's taken just takes you back 3 or 4 months.
I think it's possible that they may have done a number of things at the end of Q4 and the beginning of Q1 that made Q1 not great. And look, I'm not a stock picker, but I have a feeling their Q1 is going to be muted. And it's probably going to make the stock go down. But if you're looking at, holding it for more than 6 months, I think it's probably a good.
So all these 4 companies, who do you think is most vulnerable? Who do you think, if you had to pick who's going to be around in 10, 20, 30 years, most likely to least likely? I mean,
Apple, Amazon.
Apple, most likely?
Yeah, Apple.
The brand of the business itself. I know the brand will survive, but you think
the brand. I honestly.
the brand's around for 100 years probably, right?
Yeah. And I don't know what the business is underneath it, but look how many times it's changed. But Apple, Amazon, Google, I would all have no problem betting on.
You think Facebook's the most vulnerable?
I think Facebook is vulnerable. I think it's vulnerable because it does not have a direct relationship with its customers.
It doesn't.
Facebook
Facebook doesn't have a direct.
No, it doesn't.
So when I'm on Instagram, that's
Facebook
not
ever talk to you? Does Instagram ever talk to you?
How does Amazon talk to me?
Well, I mean, Amazon talks to you, it gives you recommendations. It's integrated into your home, right? With Alexa, it's you're talking to it. It's getting into those businesses that understand. The customer relationship with Facebook strikes me as brittle, as fragile. Because really what they're doing is selling you to someone else. They're not selling you to their service.
And how's that different than Google? Different than Google? What?
Well, I just think Google is a more robust core business, which is that that it has this intention base to it that is not attention, it's intention. And so you're used to asking Google questions. You have a conversational relationship with Google, and that feels more solid than the getting sold to me when I'm not sure I wanted it relationship, which feels shaky to me long term. Instagram was a very good buy, and WhatsApp was as well, because those are more these utilities that you don't ever want to go away, right? But on that core Facebook, to me, I think we've hit peak core Facebook.
And where can people find more of your stuff? They obviously Nuco, your stuff on Medium. If they want to pick up a book on Google from the early days, The Search, where else can they find your stuff?
I think Twitter's probably the best way to stay in touch with me.
Just John Battelle?
Everything I find important, I put there, at John Battelle.
Good. Yeah. John Battelle, founder in San Francisco, icon of the early tech days. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Missing my